Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and today I'm reviewing The Arrest by Jonathan Lethem. I don't talk about him quite as much as I talk about people like Lovecraft or Chabon or even Jennifer Egan, but Jonathan Lethem really is among my very favorite writers. Chronic City is wonderful, borderline speculative, but then again maybe not quite novel about life in a bizarre off-kilter Manhattan. Is a good candidate to the title of my favorite novel of all times, and books like Motherless Brooklyn, which I intend to reread quite soon, The Fortress of Solitude, Dissident Gardens, are also among the best I've ever read, definitely in American literature. In the last few years, Lethem has abandoned the scope and the ambitiousness of Dissident Gardens, by far his most ambitious novel and quite a recent one too, for more contained, smaller efforts, not necessarily less interesting, but definitely with less meat on the metaphorical narrative fire. Stuff like The Blot / A Gambler's Anatomy or The Feral Detective, books focusing on one, maybe two eccentric, peculiar characters immersed in extraordinary circumstances. These books in many ways call to mind Lethem's early efforts, debuts like Gun with Occasional Music, As She Climbed Across the Tables, much more limited, much shorter novels with smaller casts of characters that tried to elaborate a single peculiar development in scientific thought and tried to explain how this impacted the life and show how this changed the life of a few interesting characters. The Arrest follows in that pattern most definitely, and it is the novel among his recent works that reads the most like one of his early science fiction novels, and that is possibly the keyword there, because unlike The Blot, unlike Feral Detective, this is a science fiction novel. The Arrest, in fact, reads very much like a golden age science fiction novel, or even a new wave 1960s Philip K. Dick / early Ballard sort of sci-fi novel, and even just in the way it's narrated, it's structured along very short chapters, sometimes just a couple paragraphs, hardly ever more than a few pages, and the action moves somewhat fast, but with ample time to focus on the peculiarities, on the consequences of the scientific twist at the heart of the book, this arrest that, well, without revealing too much, put a stop on the dynamics of our hyper-globalized, ultra-active society and brought us back to simpler times, with all of the implications of that. One of the objections that is generally moved against genre fiction, and against science fiction in particular, is that it focuses more on the speculative elements it contains, on maybe making the science elements especially rigorous and especially consistent with latest scientific thought, but maybe doesn't focus as strongly as literary fiction on developing characters that are psychologically complex and true to life and interesting and multi-layered, and that contain those multitudes that make great literary characters. It's an unfair point, like all generalizations, but it is not entirely removed from the truth. If I think about some of my my favorite novels from the golden age of science fiction, like The Demolished Man by Alfred Bastard, like the works of Frederick Brown, or some of Isaac Asimov's novels, I remember the plots of these books very much, the reflections contained within them, some of the twists they contain, but I can't really say that I remember their characters are as among the most wonderfully well-rounded I've ever encountered, and in a way the characters in The Arrest fall into that same pattern. I'm not calling it a flaw, I'm not calling it I'm not describing this as a problem of the novel, it's just one of its features. The characters in the book tend to fall into simple personality traits. You have the, well, hard-ass survivor who becomes the leader of this community after the arrest, because she knows what she's doing, she knows what steps need to be taken to save the community. You have the Jokers, you have the Mad Maxi warriors, the traumatized survivors, and you have the protagonist. And Lethem's protagonist, as many of Lethem's protagonists, maybe its main personality trait might be that he lacks a main personality trait, that he is a gregarious character by definition. He's called journeyman. He's constantly traveling to and from the various points that compose this peninsula, this microcosm where the characters live. The very first chapter of The Arrest lasts a couple of pages, and it's very lyrical, it's very contains some quite interesting wordplay, but it's not really going anywhere. It's just ever so slightly self-indulgent. I was like, hold on, Jonathan, are you trying to be the Lilo? Come on, do you really need to? But it ends on a paragraph that I like very much. The narrator is contemplating this sign that reads Frost heaves. What does that mean? It's a syntactic puzzle, a verb itself frozen. But he concludes these chapters, he or she, the narrator, concludes this chapter by saying, maybe Frost is in fact a person, that poet we studied in high school. Frost heaves into the mind. His road diverged, ours doesn't. Though really isn't any road you could follow in either of two directions divergent enough to begin with. And I like that idea very much. Mostly because Journeyman himself is clearly on some kind of path, and he is moving potentially in both directions. When something infringes on the peace of this peninsula, somebody from his past comes along looking for him, he is given the chance to go back to the world he had before the arrest, to all he lost, to his ambitions, to his active life and dreams, or to move forward and embrace this new, slower, harsher, harder dynamic. What I'm trying to say by pulling in that metaphor and bringing in this elaborate quotation is the fact that, sure, maybe the characters in this book are not three-dimensional, maybe they are two-dimensional, but that doesn't mean that they aren't awesome characters. There is, in fact, an artistry, and a very difficult one, in creating a novel that portrays such a vivid microcosm and is peopled with so many characters, and in making them interesting and in making them efficient, effective, live cogs of this microcosm, of this diorama almost, without spending too much textual effort into it, just by giving you maybe the single defining doubt that defines these characters. Will the Mad Maxi warriors that protect the people of the peninsula in exchange for food keep protecting them, or will they turn into murderous barbarians? The woman who's shut into the library and refuses to engage with the community, is she hiding a dark past, or will she, or is she just scared? Will she become a member of the community? Will she stay isolated? The fact that these characters are structured along such minimal axes is in no way a flaw. If anything, it's something that shows a great mastery of storytelling. Now, as I was starting the novel, I was struggling a bit with getting truly absorbed into it, getting truly engaged in the narrative, and part of it definitely had to do with the fact that, if you didn't know, Lethem is a big nerd, and like all big nerds, likes his specialist jargon and his obscure words, and very often uses a cryptic term where the most basic of words would do just fine, which means that until you click with the way he writes and you get into the pace of the novel, there's an initial period where, at least for me, whenever I read one of his novels, I had to stop and reread half of the sentences I read because I'm not quite sure that I understand what's happening. But it wasn't just that, it wasn't just a matter of adjusting to the Lethem shift, it was also that the book was referring back to other Lethem's novels. The characters in the novel, in their past, they were developing this movie/series called Yet Another World, which is a cute nod to a video game slash website in Chronic City. This is not the first time Lethem inserts these nods to the rest of his work and connects his novels with one another. Perkus Tooth, the co-protagonist in Chronic City, is referenced in Dissident Gardens, and so on and so forth. And very early into the novel you also find the insertion of something that I always struggle with, which is friggin' figures. A marvelous machine appears into the narrative, and the text offers you a couple of figures, one from a comic book and the other from God knows whatever this is, in order to try and show you what the machine looks like, or to give your mind a chance to kind of create its own balance between the two. I don't know, I must confess, this always strikes me, it smells to me of author who went power crazy with their production budget. Were the pictures really needed? Were they necessary to the narrative? I don't have anything against pictures. I'm currently reading Prague Cemetery by Umberto Eco, which is full of pictures, it's full of illustrations, but these again are just illustrations. If they were removed from the narrative, the text wouldn't change at all. Fusing the two, making your text rely on the figures, always smells to me of gimmick a little bit, unless you go all in like Mark Danielewski and say House of Leaves. And even Mark Danielewski, who spent his entire career going all in, nailed House of Leaves, but I'm not really the biggest fan of anything else he's ever written, if I have to be honest. All of this, I think, is to say that I was struggling with getting into The Arrest, and I think I know who I should blame for that, which is this bad thing, Utopia Avenue. What the problems I was finding with The Arrest were the same I had encountered earlier this year with Utopia Avenue. Easily my least favorite novel I read this year, and maybe in recent years. Utopia Avenue also features a lot of cute nods to the other works by David Mitchell, and lots of people pointed this out in the comments to my review, and they said, well, but it does, if you've read this other book, then it's cute to see the character come back. But I'm like, yeah, who cares? If it's a bad novel, it's still a bad book. And it also goes a bit crazy with the production budget. I guess I was worried that Lethem had created something similar, something that was maybe tailored to Lethem fans, or even worse, that he created to indulge his own passion in revisiting his previous works and in doing something a bit cute, but that maybe had like less or little value to the reader. Bottom line, my last concern with the novel was that it had created such an interesting world, this arrest, this world where technology stopped functioning in bizarre ways and we're thrown back in a sort of Middle Ages in 21st century America. It's so fascinating. This is a wonderful setting. It's the kind of setting any other writer would have exploited to put out a 1,000-page novel, or more likely 3 to 7 600-page books. And I was like, come on, Lethem, what can you possibly do in 200 pages? Obviously you're not going to do justice to this setting. Obviously you're going to disappoint me. And yet he didn't. And yet, bizarrely, magically almost, Lethem manages to pack an entire conflict between two ways of reading this post-apocalyptic realm. The hippie collective, organic farming, peace and love sort of approach, and let's get armed because very soon people are gonna try and steal our shit. He manages to portray the clash of these two worlds in a very convincing way, in a way that shows the problems and the relationships that tie these two worlds together, the hypocrisy of one, the brutality of the other. He manages to portray this conflict wonderfully by giving you just a couple of brutal events and a couple of terrible twists. That 1,000-page novel I mentioned before, I don't think it would have developed the plot of The Arrest much more than Lethem did, but it would have taken a less skilled writer 800 more pages to get there. Whereas the few events you are given in the book leave you reeling with so many doubts, but doubts of the stimulating kind. What happened there? What happened in this conflict? Why was this particular situation diffused? Was it because of this character's actions? Did the actions actually move against the process of pacifying the two sides? It's very difficult to talk about this without giving away the plot, which I don't intend to do, but you'll have to trust me that reading The Arrest definitely feels like getting a very satisfying dose of life in this strange new world. It's not just a matter of dipping your toe into something that might be interesting, but you can't really experience fully anyway. It does feel like spending some time in this strange, stimulating, sad, mourning community. The other reason that makes The Arrest so brilliant is that alongside these very carefully portrayed, very interesting developments that happen, after all, on the background of the main action, the main action all points toward one single brilliant twist. The main plot element, the main conflict at the heart of the book is the appearance in this peaceful community of the strange monstrosity you can see on the beautiful cover of the novel, this bizarre car/weapon called the Blue Streak. And the way Lethem resolves the appearance of the Blue Streak is not only surprising, not only really thrilling and really unexpected, but almost gives the novel a symbolic, if not allegorical, I'm throwing big words around, but I'm not doing it lightly, almost an allegorical dimension, where the appearance of this strange machine and the way the characters deal with it is almost cast in the terms of a conflict, not just with those barbarians, the Mad Maxi warriors, but with the world before The Arrest, with the hyper-globalized, super-fast, exploitative, unjust world we all live in. In one of the most interesting reflections in The Arrest, at one point a couple of characters talk about post-apocalyptic fiction. They diss The Road by Cormac McCarthy. They talk about the fact that the post-apocalypse in all of these depictions is always awesome, and it's always so much better than the world you're leaving behind. At the moment, I'm playing Fallout 4, a video game I'm enjoying for its sandbox elements and for, exploring everything and shooting the monsters and seeing what's behind the next hill, but at the same time it feels very propagandistic to me. It feels to me like the satire that animated the early Fallouts at one point was just completely forgotten, and now the Fallout 4 absolutely embraces the kind of American patriotism that it was supposed to criticize. Anyway, games like Fallout 4, a lot of post-apocalyptic video games and movies, they depict the post-apocalypse as awesome, as kind of a world where the just can eventually triumph, where if only you're inventive and resourceful, you can live like a king. And I feel like that's another one of the battles that The Arrest fights. A fight against this vision of the post-apocalypse as idyllic, as some kind of utopia. A way of portraying it as a place of immense mourning, a place of vast loss and of great sacrifice, inevitable, constant sacrifice, without falling onto mere catastrophe porn or without making the book in any way grim or indulge in the bizarre pleasure of contemplating the fall of civilization and the grimness of this conflicted world. So yeah, The Arrest is a masterpiece. I really loved it. It's easily my favorite among Lethem's recent novels, easily my favorite post-Dissident Gardens novel. If I had to compare it to his early science fiction novels, I would probably... It would still be among my favorite of his. As She Climbed Across the Table is still his best sci-fi novel, if you ask me, but this could be a second or third. Because obviously I always have to rank things, I just like it so much. And I'm really curious to discuss it with you and to hear what you thought of The Arrest. Thank you so much to the good people at Atlantic Books for my review copy of the novel. Thank you to Jonathan Lethem for another great work of fiction, another small masterpiece. And thank you, kind viewer. I'll see you in the next review. Bye, guys.